So I'm going to talk about creating an arts programme from scratch and also envisaging it and then initiating it, then fundraising for it, then creating it and the dialogues internally and externally, and then it continuing as well. And I'm just going to say what it is and then afterwards ask for questions. But during the time, I ought to say that this arts programme is different from yours, the ones you're envisaging, in the sense yours is very specific because it's basically envisaging artists, scientists coming together to envisage and solve complex problems. I initiated an arts programme which wasn't doing that, but was just saying, right, we're going to go to the world's largest physics laboratory and we're going to create an arts programme which has no outcomes at all, because what I wanted to create was somewhere which would honour the creative process for artists and give them the time and space to plunge into an unknown world and research and change their art practice, come up with new ideas with no outcomes expected. But that's because I knew that if I got the process right, they would create something and it would happen. But I very strongly believe we've lost trust in artists and their creative process, and yet an artist exists to create and make. A work of art takes as long as it takes. You can't say, here's a grant, you're going to create it in 3 months. It takes as long as it takes. And that's what I wanted to do at this science lab. And that's what I created. It's very funny being here with Bill, because Bill, I was at the Exploratorium talk with Bill in 2010, which was right at the beginning of my journey when I'd just been hired by CERN. So he heard a talk where I was talking about what I was envisaging. And we're now 5 years later and the programme is fully established and is continuing even without me, because I'm now on the board and I secured funding for a further 8 years for one of the strands for after me and a further 4 years for the strands after that as well. And I did it all myself. Nobody helped me. So how do you do it? Anyway, I think we're in a great age at the moment where arts and science is coming together. We have artists becoming scientists, like Brian May becoming an astrophysicist with big credibility these days. We have, for example, Iris van Herpen creating arts projects which draw on genetic research, and this was at the Paris Fashion Show 2 years ago. We have Thomas Saraceno creating extraordinary worlds out of his understanding of clouds and formations of water. We have extraordinary novels pulling on quantum physics, like Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's great. And we've got Michel Houellebecq, for example, drawing again on physics, as well as this extraordinary artist drawing on data from climate change and visualization, as well as this project, which I created. More about that later. So as we've seen from Bill and Harrison also, arts actually is an incredible communication tool in essence. It reaches the hearts and parts which science and technology alone can't reach, because it appeals to senses and feelings, as we've been discussing, and those are long-lasting and changing. It's also a way of selling the idea by saying this is a form of creative science communications, because it's about inspiration and creation. And it's inviting audiences, both people inside organisations, but people outside organisations, to discover and explore science. I mean, the programme I created at CERN, for example, the scientists didn't know any of the other lot of the other programmes happening on the campus, which is a huge campus enclosed in a 27-kilometre ring. So, for example, a very famous astrophysicist had never gone underground at all in his life, and for the first time through the arts programme he went underground. Or through the arts programme I discovered they had created this new incredible way of storing electricity. Nobody knew about it on campus. It was a new evolution which had been done with Siemens. The press office didn't know about it. And just because I was nosing around, I discovered it, and the press office was alerted about it. So there are all these kind of untold benefits which come out because, as we know, artists cross borders. So this is where it all began, really, at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN. In 2009, I won a prize, and they said you can go anywhere you like in the world for 3 months. And I said I want to go to CERN, because I believe that science organisations are the great places where new ideas are formed, and where new ideas are formed and where new knowledge is formed, that is a great storehouse of the imagination for artists, and it's a great place for the two to meet. It's very important to look at the organisation, and when I went in to do a 3-month feasibility study for setting up an arts programme. It didn't just come out of the blue. I really studied it. I looked first of all at the mission of CERN, which is to push back the frontiers of knowledge, for example. Well, arts is a form of knowledge. It's the knowledge of the senses, an embodied knowledge, instinct, and that's what I argued. Developing new technologies for accelerators and detectors, yes, well, artists could engage with that and give new ways of looking. Training scientists and engineers of tomorrow, you can argue communications is a great way, because if a scientist can communicate with an artist, then they're learning new ways of communicating and uniting people from different countries and cultures. Yes, that bringing artists in, more cultures, more countries. So you can see, if you create something, you have to really fit it into the mission statement of the organisation. And I very deliberately fitted mine in. I also, as I said it was going to be a creative, fundamental research project for artists. And that's because CERN is a fundamental research laboratory, so it understood that you could create something without outcomes. It understood that. It doesn't necessarily mean it was easy for them to accept it, but they understood it. So there was, again, a mission match, and that is really important, yes, to get buy-in with the organisation. So it's an extraordinary organisation. Just to explain quickly, 100 different countries working together, 680 institutions around the world, over 11,500 scientists and engineers, all focused on this place. It's a 27-kilometre underground ring which recreates the beginning of the universe, just after the universe was born, by smashing particles together just underneath the surface, at just under the speed of light. Well, when the last run was 100,000 times, but it's now really doubled that, so it's much faster now. Higher energies, more collisions, and it spans the Swiss and French border, so it's very cross-cultural. Very quickly, it's called the fastest racetrack on the planet because it smashes these particles under the speed of light. Emptiest place on the planet because it has vacuums inside these things, which are the things which the particles go through. Those are magnets. It's also the coldest place because they have to actually keep those magnets incredibly cool because of the high energy, because it's actually the hottest place, because when they collide, they generate temperatures 1,000 million times hotter than the sun. So that has to happen as well. The most sophisticated detectors ever built. These are like giant cameras which take snapshots of the invisible. The collisions which happen, they're big snapshots. And we did a partnership last year with the Carnegie Museum, with the Hillman Center of Photography, which has got a documentary about that, if you want to look at that online. And it talks about those being cameras of the invisible. And it has to have the most extensive computer system in the world to analyze all this data. Well, for me, I thought, oh my God, this is the most amazing place for artists to come and for new knowledge. And that's just one aspect of CERN, for example. For example, they're looking at climate change very heavily. There's an incredible project there called Cloud, which I've been tracking since the beginning, which looks at how clouds are formed and is coming to new conclusions about this. So why would this also begin at CERN? I've talked about the mission, but I've also, if you look at the history of art in the 20th century and the way modernism was very highly infused by Einstein and Heisenberg and their notions of subjectivity, very important. It really changed our vision of the world, as well as the crossover between particle physics, stealing from James Joyce and going, let's take the word quark from Finnegan's Wake and turn it into the name for fundamental particles. So there's always been this kind of two-way process going between. And so I put this to CERN as very important. Also, when I went to CERN, I discovered all these artists had gone through the doors and nobody knew. They didn't know who Andres Gursky was. They didn't know he'd been there, created a work inspired by CERN. They didn't know, for example, Liz Lerman had been there. All these people had been there, and they didn't know it. Nobody had taken any record. And I said, look, you are inspiring people now, like in the 20th century, and when you switch on, you will be actually inspiring more people. And we need to bring culture together. It's no good being science and technology in the 21st century. It has to be science, technology, and the arts together. Opera sets also inspired by CERN. So as part of my feasibility study, I looked at what had gone before, and it's always important to look at previous models. If you don't have a model where you are, just look at other models in your area. Super important. So very important project, one of those seminal arts science projects called Signatures of the Invisible, which came to CERN in 2000, was by the filmmaker Ken McMullen. And I looked at that very heavily, and I interviewed the scientists and artists who were on both sides of that equation and talked to them. And that was interesting because that was selected artists by Ken McMullen who are all visual, who came in for, one came in for 1 day, one came in for 2 months, one came in for 3 days, and I talked to people on both sides of the divide. I talked to one of the artists who came in for 1 day who created a work which was not the kind of work I associate with him. And I said to him, so why did you create that work? And do you mind me saying it's a really bad piece of work? He said, I was really, really cross, like really, really angry, because I was just dumped in the laboratory. There was no one to guide me. I was just there. Nobody looked after me. So I did that piece of work as a protest. And how good of you to understand that. And he's like a world famous artist. And he was just really cross. So that show told me a lot about how important it is to have somebody on the ground to curate that process. Equally, the scientists were really cross because as a group, as CERN, they all love working in a community, and the scientists basically said, oh, they just came in, stole our ideas, went out. And there was no sense of getting to know them and them being part of our community. And we felt really sad and cheated and kind of what was going on. So that was a very important part of the feasibility study, which really put the argument for a residency. And I think residencies are amazing for long-term effects, actually, and very deep thinking. I also looked at what CERN had, and it had before lots of random and unselected arts engagement, and where people came in and out all the time and nobody knew how and why they came in and out, whether they were Cedric Klapisch or whether they were Andres Gursky, nobody really knew. So it was very important to try and centralise it and create a CERN official project. So the feasibility main studies showed the scientists wanted engagement. They wanted to really understand the artists and to be there, and they wanted understanding, consistency and contact. And the artists wanted structure, guidance, a producer, links and acts of translation sometimes in the language between, as well as also being introduced to scientists they felt would be relevant for their work and for their inspiration. So it was very much that. So another argument which really made CERN very key was I discovered really that artists and physicists are very alike in some ways, because artists, physicists divide into theorists and experimentalists, theorists thinking beyond the paradigm, and then the experimentalists testing those theories and bring them down to earth. And that's essentially what artists do. They do both those things. So there was quite a very strong match again between the two. There you have Fabiola Gianotti, who's the new Director General of CERN, and she started her life as a concert pianist. And she had to choose between being a concert pianist or a physicist. She plays the piano every day and she's a physicist now. and that's Matthew Gardner, who chose to be an artist and could have been a scientist. So what was created at CERN was, oh gosh, that was a long journey. Started in 2010, and today in 2015 there are 3 strands to it. The Collide at CERN Artist Residency Programme, where 2 artists a year win through open call the chance to come to CERN, fully funded for up to 3 months. That funding came all from external funding. When CERN hired me in 2010 following the feasibility study, they said there are 2 catches. We want you to do it, and we want you to raise the money. No, they said we want the money to come externally. They didn't say I would have to raise it, but I knew I was going to be having to raise it. And because I was determined to bring artists and scientists on the same level, I was not going to put up with artists having to find their own funding and coming in. No, no, no. I wanted them to be funded when they came in, and enough funding so if they were with family as well, they could come with their family. So I was deliberately making life hard for myself, because if I'd said it could be a science communications project, I might have got funding, but I said no, I want artists and scientists on the same level. So I had to raise 50k for each residency, so that's 50-50, that's 300k for 3 years to make that happen, so that they came in on an equal basis, and that was very important. There's also now an Accelerate at CERN Artist Research Programme, which is for 1 month, 2 artists a year, and a visiting artist programme where an artist comes for 1 or 2 days to have a curated visit, and that has high impact too. So what I had to create was boring things, policy, because the science organisation understands policy, so do outside people. So I had to create an arts policy, step 1, great arts for great science, basically doing what it says on the tin. What I had at CERN was a place which was known for the excellence of its science, was unique for that, and they're all hand-picked. So I had to say, okay, we're bringing the arts in at the same level as the science, so the artists will be handpicked. But what I also discovered in the feasibility study was the scientists felt that there was no way of measuring arts practices good, and that it was all about personal taste. So in order to avoid that, I deliberately created up an open call, and I didn't curate the artists myself. I didn't select them. I made us have a peer review. And again, that's very, very important to marry the languages together, and that's something Harrison was talking about, the importance of language. Actually using the language of science to get your message across actually works. So I called it peer review rather than open call. And I also deliberately called my projects titles which reflected the science. So Collide at CERN from Collider, Accelerate at CERN from the Accelerator. Again, very important to create buy-in and instant recognition. And I basically founded it totally on equal exchange, respect and value. And that's what I mentioned earlier. Parity and equality is so important in creating really meaningful science arts exchanges, and that needs to be founded in economics, I think, very strongly. So there has to be economic parity, there has to be mutual respect. So selection of the artists created mutual respect between the artists and the scientists, because the scientists understood that the artists had competed just as they had done. And I made sure that scientists were on those juries and panels as well as artists and curators, so that there was this mixed sense of everybody together. Had to create a cultural board, so that's very wonderful. I appointed people who were leaders in their art forms, so Beatrix Roof, who was at the Kunsthaus Zurich and has now moved to the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and also scientists again on the board. So Michael Dozer, world expert on antimatter, very important. And I also went to all those people who'd gone under the radar to CERN, and I said, would you mind being named patrons, not giving money, but being ambassadors to say that you support this project? And again, that was really helpful for creating buy-in when I was going to funders with this idea. So Jacques Herzog said, yes, I'm happy. All these people said, yes, they were happy to be named patrons. So getting those big names, again, is very super important. So I was hired in 2010. The Director General said, you're my special project. I'll pay for you for a year. You've got a year to set up all the partnerships and all the funding. I said, okay, I'm up for the challenge because I believe in this and I really want it to happen. So within a year, I'd created the 2 strands of the Artists in Residency program. So that, yes, I saw Bill right at the beginning of my crazy year of fundraising and partnership building. And the way I looked at it was, I felt it was very important to go local and also global. And local because you don't plant a tree without putting roots in it. You don't let it reach the sky without putting roots. So local, super important. CERN is located in Geneva. Geneva was super important to CERN in its founding. Big split between the 2 organisations. When I arrived, I could see there was a strategic mission to try and join them up together. I thought, aha, this is where arts can be a cultural ambassador, create a bridge. So I went to Geneva and said, oi, we can celebrate together Geneva as a city of culture and the impact it's had on the arts and science throughout millennia. You know, got Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, the great art science collision, for example. Extraordinary biologists have come out of Geneva. Let's do this arts program together for 3 years. They thought I was quite crazy. My French was appalling, but I really persuaded them with my vision about arts and science being on the same level and also building those bridges and connecting. So they funded me for 3 years, that project, initially, more about later. Then I thought global, we need an international partner who again matches CERN in terms of its status, and sort of in terms of some aspects of it. So I went to Ars Electronica Linz, who are the digital arts organisation, who have a festival every year, and I said, oi, come on board and run this with us. And I really wanted their title as well, actually, because Prix Ars Electronica, very important in the digital world, internationally recognised. I knew if I got their brand title with mine, I was a young baby, Collide at CERN, that then I would get some status. And I also persuaded them to do their 2011 festival was dedicated to CERN, and it was called Origin. And it was at that festival that we announced Collide at CERN and the open call for the 2 artists in residency. So you can see how I was building this project really from nothing, creating global and local, building on brands, looking at other brands and bringing them in, and also preserving the integrity of my project. Ars Electronica Linz brought in the prize money, I ought to say, so that was 10,000, but I fundraised all the rest from philanthropists. And my philanthropists were extraordinary and have continued to support me to this day, and they come from the US, China and Hong Kong, and the UK. And they were incredible. They're called Friends of Collide at CERN. But they've been very, very extraordinary in making this happen. So you can see that it was funded through different means. One, obviously federal, and I also got a bit of corporate, because I got a corporate to do the artist's insurance, but obviously more than the artist's insurance, because any funding you times by 300% from a corporate. And so it's a mixture of private philanthropists, tiny bit from them, and from Geneva. That was for 3 years. Yeah, so it was a mixed economy. And as ever, as you know, trying to get as few partners, funders as possible, super important, because you're maintaining all these relationships all the time. So the 3-year project started, it was conceived of as an international open competition judged by jury. The Ars Electronica one is international. The Geneva one, I ought to say, is international, but only for artists who live or work or born in Geneva. But I accepted that because it was building relationships with Geneva, and that was Geneva's thing. Prize money and living costs for up to 3 months. So prize money was a stipend, which was 5,000 a month. And the living costs, as I said, that all added up to 50k, because that was Switzerland. And the idea was to have a CERN dedicated science inspiration partner, and we deliberately chose the word inspiration partner, not mentor, because again, equality, and that was the Director General's idea, actually. He said to me, let's call it inspiration partner. And we had production input and engagement by our cultural partners. And we made sure the artists really were in residence and they were actually on site, not coming in and out, but actually on site, because community had been so important in my feasibility study. And actually open workshops turned into something else. It turned into interventions, but more of that later, because it turned out interventions were better. And what I also created was something which worked from micro to macro. Very important. So you start with the artist coming in, being matched with a scientist. Then at the start of their creative, and then they came, that matching actually happened 3 months before the residency, when the artist came for a week and was introduced to lots of different scientists, but also went underground, had science lectures morning to night, and survived it. And then they were matched at the end of it with a scientist. And that was a 360-degree process in which the artist had a say, the scientists had a say, I had a say. And then we matched them to be the creative partner with them throughout their journey. Then during the curated time at the residency, the artist was introduced to many others when they came back and had many other experiences as well. But at the beginning of their journey, they had to give a public lecture, so that fed into the stakeholders, the local stakeholders, at the beginning and the end of the residency, and had to do a blog as well, doing their experiences. So that's communicating everything as it goes along. And then out of that, international exhibition opportunities happened. So as I said, they were our first international cultural partner. We did an arts festival with them and a massive open call. And the first artist who won out of 400 people was Julius von Bismarck. He's not a terrorist, extraordinary, but a great artist. And I was really keen on him coming because one of the other guarantees I said was the artists can do anything. They can be as critical as they like of the organisation. Now, we all know what happened with the NASA Artists in Residence program when Laurie Anderson was invited in, and they said to Laurie, you can do anything. And Laurie did say, what do you want me to do? What do you expect of me? And they said, oh, you can just do anything. Actually, what they expected was really lovely communications about NASA. And of course, Laurie wasn't going to do that. Well, I was always very clear, don't expect anything from my guys. They will do anything. Okay, and he could do anything.
How many categories of the prize are there?
How many? There are 2 prizes a year for Collide at CERN, and there's honorary mentions as well.
And
oh yes, they change. So the one with Ars Electronica is digital arts, any art form, but you have to engage with the digital as a means of transmission or production or research. And with the City of Geneva, it was a rotating art form. First year it was dance, second year it was film, third year it was music and sound. And this year it's changed again. I mean, it's going to change again and carry on rotating as it rotates, because it's continuing. And this was our other first artist. He was the Geneva Prize. And something wonderful happened actually between him and him. We'll find out about that in a minute. So as I said, inspiration partner is incredibly important. I think you know which the scientist is by now. Maybe? Anyway, I chose for Julius, this guy who's an expert on hidden worlds, to take Julius further. And those two, they have to meet once a week, but they've carried on actually meeting now. God, Julius came 2012 and he's still with us. They're still carrying on this conversation 3 years later, and James came up with an extraordinary project which we hope to place in Greece next year. And Julius is so overexcited about that. So inspiration partners, incredibly important matching process, I think. As I said, it's all about process and discovery, about creative collisions, but creating inelastic collisions, as he said, because James got fundamentally changed by his experience with Julius. I've never seen anybody carry so many art books back from an arts festival. He was literally two-sided. He was so excited and he's so engaged in making this art piece with Julius, which is a real art piece. It's not an art science piece, it's a real art piece. And one of the other unexpected collisions were between my first two artists, who, so Julius and Gilles. Gilles saw Julius's lamps, which sort of came out of the residency because the process was good. So they were shown, they actually opened in the Berlin Art Fair and then went to, they've shown in Taiwan, and they're called Versuch und Kreisen, and they're 4 lamps which spin and come in synchronicity every 68th turn. Anyway, Gilles saw them and said, I love those so much, I want them for the set for my new dance piece, which I'm going to create after my residency at CERN. That was world premiered at CERN in October 2013 at the CMS experiment, and that's the dancers in rehearsal dancing above the very spot where the Higgs boson was discovered, and that's a life-size photograph of CMS detector.
Looks remarkably like a rose window.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they are incredibly beautifully extraordinary machines. I always say the beauty of CERN is not above ground. It looks like the set of The Prisoner. It's horrific. The buildings are falling down. It's 1950s, 60s. The beauty is underground, where you see that and you go, oh my God, human beings create this to discover the beginning of the world. And then the beauty is inside the minds of the scientists, which are extraordinary, very extraordinary. Anyway, when people say, okay, so you said there was no outcome to your residency, I go, ha ha. So in 2013, ting, if you get the process right, the first 2 artists have the world premiere of that piece, and they win the Hermes Foundation Award, which brings them to Paris for a world premiere and then takes them to New York to the Crossing Lines Festival. And then it's basically been on international tour ever since. And I just got an email yesterday saying actually it's appearing in Germany, so I did Germany on the slide. It's still on international tour. Quantum continues. So that's the first one. And CERN has not paid for it, actually. CERN has not paid for it. They've done about 10,000 they did for the show when it opened, and they supported it for the show when it opened at CMS, but that's it.
So what is quantum?
Who are the funders?
What is quantum?
Quantum is a choreography by Gilles Jobin.
What's that dance?
Yes, the dance piece. The dance piece with the installation. Sorry.
Who functions as the point producer of the piece?
The touring piece. Gilles does. Gilles, yeah. Yeah, Gilles Jobin does. So he produces it. I was acting as the contact point and creating lots of different discussions regarding, and I also raised the funds for it from Swissnex.
Are there royalties involved?
No. So what we do with any of the arts, no, that's kind of important. So that's a very important point, because it comes into the point which you have to think about when you're setting up your own scheme about artists' IP. So if you've got something which goes into the research, is a research process, which says there's going to be no product, but you know there's going to be, we've always said the IP belongs to the artist, so the artist can do whatever they like with it.
So she might have a royalty.
Yeah, they have royalties, but not CERN.
And then there's no scientific intellectual property that...
No, we give away the knowledge.
This is an interesting point that's come up in some other discussions that
Mm.
I've been in. That is in conflict. So, for example, I had an artist in my lab, had a studio in my lab, and she should retain the intellectual property rights, right? But my university claims that any
Ah.
intellectual property generated, even
Yep.
if I do it in my basement and it has nothing to do with my research,
Yeah.
belongs to them. Likewise, her creative endeavors are intellectual property then that belongs to the university, right?
Yeah. That is a problem. That is a problem. And I was with the Wellcome, which is why I missed your first day. I was doing a talk with the Wellcome, and there was Manchester University were there, and they had exactly that problem. But in the end, they wrote an individual contract for the artist saying the artist had IP. Now they feel really sad because the artist's gone away with the project, and they want to show the project and they can't because the artist doesn't want them to show the project anymore. So you have to get the definitions right at the beginning.
It's something we were just whispering about here.
Oh, right.
This
Okay.
is a huge thing, really.
Yep.
If this takes off, one of the big issues in the culture side is this notion of an idea being locked down as my idea.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to share it, they have to pay me somehow, some kind of royalty.
Yeah.
Which, when you think of broader impacts, the opposite of true, and not in science, where if we make meaning of something, we then want the public to have it.
Yeah.
In fact, the public has to have it if, for example, NSF is funded.
But it's really interesting when you think that the role of the artist, if the role of the artist is to advance our understanding of meaning making,